What if the language of the divine was never spoken in sound at all, but written in light? And what if each of those lights, scattered across the dark vault of the heavens, was not merely a star, but a letter? You look up, and the night sky seems different now. Not random, not chaotic, but deliberate, as though an unseen hand has traced invisible lines between the points of light, forming characters you can almost read. By the end of this journey, you will know what these letters are, why they were drawn, and how they became the script of angels in the hands of a Renaissance magician. You will be able to see the marks of the celestial alphabet, not only in old grimoires and talismans, but in the constellations themselves, and perhaps in the architecture of your own thoughts. Welcome, seeker of forgotten truths. You have stepped into a chamber where ink is made of starlight, and parchment is the space between worlds. The man who placed this script into mortal hands was Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa, a German scholar, physician, and philosopher of the occult in the early 16th century. In the candlelit study rooms of Cologne and Paris, he gathered every fragment of mystical knowledge he could find: Hermetic treatises, Hebrew Kabbalah, Neoplatonic theurgy, and the cryptic diagrams of medieval magicians. From this vast synthesis, he assembled his 3 books of occult philosophy, a map of the hidden architecture of the cosmos, and in the 3rd book, The Realm of Angels and Divine Names, he revealed a set of alphabets unlike any written before. Among them, the one he called Scriptura Coelestis, the celestial alphabet. It was not an invention he claimed for himself. Agrippa presented it as a legacy, delivered by the ancient Kabbalists, handed down as a means to write the names of God and his angels, in forms that both conceal and reveal their power. 22 characters, each aligned with a letter of the Hebrew alphabet. No vowels, no curves, only thin, deliberate strokes ending in small circles, like the stars at the tips of rays. You imagine those circles as Sephiroth, divine emanations shining in the tree of life, and the lines as the channels between them. Or perhaps they are constellations, patterns traced from the firmament itself. In either case, each letter is a microcosm of heaven, a distilled fragment of the celestial order. To write in this alphabet was not simply to transcribe. It was to imitate creation, to set the same patterns into motion that the Creator once spoke into being. This was why, Agrippa said, such alphabets were used for encoding divine names upon talismans and in the invocations of higher powers. A name written in celestial letters was not the same name. It was the name clothed in the garments of the stars. In the Renaissance, letters were more than sounds. Hebrew mystics taught that each letter was a vessel of divine light, a spark of the creative breath. Neoplatonists saw them as steps on a ladder between the human and the divine. Agrippa took these beliefs and gave them a new skin, the sharp geometric shapes of the celestial script. You feel the texture of one in your mind, a single circle at the end of a line, like a bright star hanging at the horizon of thought. Another with 2 circles joined by a diagonal, suggesting the crossing of worlds. Each one is spare, exact, and yet heavy with layered meaning. But this was only the beginning. Agrippa's alphabet was part of a Trinity. Malachim, the writing of angels, and transitus fluvi, the crossing of the river. All three mirrored Hebrew in sequence and number, but each dressed the letters differently. Malachim resembled celestial, its lines and circles shuffled into alternate forms. Transitus fluvi curved and hooked its lines like flowing water. Together, they formed a toolbox for the magus, multiple keys to the same divine vault. Still, it was the celestial script that captured imaginations. Its shapes were spare enough to be inscribed in metal, clear enough to be traced in the air during invocation, and strange enough to pass unread by the uninitiated. Imagine the scene. A magician prepares a talisman for protection under the influence of Jupiter. He fasts, prays, and calculates the precise astrological hour. Upon a disk of polished silver, he engraves the name of the archangel Sachiel, but not in Latin, nor even in Hebrew. He translates each letter into its celestial counterpart, carving star-tipped lines that shimmer under candlelight. To him, the act is not mere ornament. It is alignment, a tuning of symbol to heaven's frequency. When the ritual is complete, the talisman is not just a piece of silver. It is a fragment of the sky, a mirror of the celestial order, a silent message in a language only angels can read. You begin to see why Agrippa and his peers valued such scripts. They were ciphers, yes, but ciphers that claimed to preserve the sanctity of the words they held. By veiling a divine name in an unfamiliar form, the practitioner both protected it from profane eyes and elevated it into a higher register of being. The act of writing became an act of magic in itself, but the celestial alphabet was also a statement, a visual declaration that the world is written in signs and that the magician is learning to read them. Yet, even as you hold this in your mind, another question stirs. Where did these shapes truly come from? Were they fragments of an ancient angelic script, as Agrippa claimed, or the inspired design of a Renaissance mind steeped in Hebrew, geometry, and star lore? In the centuries since, scholars have found no trace of the celestial alphabet in Jewish Kabbalistic manuscripts before Agrippa. It seems to have emerged fully formed from his circle, a work of creative synthesis rather than recovered antiquity. And yet, does that make it any less potent? If a symbol's power lies in the belief and intention poured into it, then 400 years of use by magicians may have given these characters a life of their own. You sense the first swell of tension now, the awareness that the celestial alphabet sits on the line between history and myth, fact and faith. It is a human creation that claims to mirror the divine. It is both a cipher and a vision, and as you trace its shapes in your mind's eye, you realize you are already learning to read them. But this is only the first door. Beyond it lie the deeper chambers, the hidden geometry of the letters, the astrological forces they reflect, and the way they became woven into the very fabric of Western ritual magic. You are ready to step further in. If you could hold in your hands a single word written in the script of angels, what name would you choose? You step into the next chamber of this journey, and the walls are no longer stone. They are diagrams. Lines intersect. Circles gleam like small suns, and each junction hums with a silent core. you realize you are standing inside the alphabet itself. The shapes float in the air around you, thin strokes ending in perfect rings, some arranged like constellations, others like the hidden scaffolding beneath Hebrew letters. They are at once austere and radiant, as if geometry has put on the garments of light. Agrippa called this scriptura coestis not by accident celestial, because it was meant to be the mirror of the heavens. Every line is a ray, every circle a star, every configuration a fragment of the divine architecture. You recall the Hermetic axiom, as above, so below. In these letters, that maxim becomes visible. The circles are not ornament. They are the Sephiroth, 10 divine emanations in Kabbalah, and the lines are the channels between them on the tree of life. Write one letter, and you are tracing the same paths angels traverse. Write a name, and you are building a miniature heaven. In another light, you see constellations. Imagine a magician gazing at the sky, connecting bright points into a pattern, and discovering that the shape echoes the letter Beth, or lamed, or shin. To trace such a form on parchment is to draw down that portion of the firmament, fixing it into matter. This is where the script's magic deepens. It is not just a cipher of Hebrew. It is a map of correspondences. Each letter stands at a crossroads of meanings. Its Hebrew identity, its numerical value, its star pattern, and its place in the web of divine forces. Aleph is the primal breath, the beginning of beginnings. A single stroke with a circle that could be the first spark in the void. Mem is water, its lines flowing between 2 points like a river's course. Shin is fire, its 3 lines radiating from a common point like tongues of flame. When you write in celestial letters, you are not merely replacing shapes. You are shifting the entire symbolic weight of the word. The name Raphael in Latin letters is one thing. In Hebrew, it becomes a vessel for healing light. In celestial script, it becomes a star map of that healing force, drawn in the language of the sky. You picture the Renaissance workshop. A brass disc rests on a velvet cloth. The magician bends over it, compass and graver in hand, carefully inscribing lines so fine that they could vanish in shadow, except for the circles which catch the glint of the lamp. Around the rim, the name of a planetary intelligence is spelled in celestial form. When finished, the talisman looks less like writing and more like an astronomical diagram from some lost observatory. To the untrained eye, it is decoration. To the initiated, it is an address, a set of coordinates in the divine order, capable of calling forth the presence inscribed there. And yet, this precision was not cold mathematics. Agrippa's world was one where science and magic had not yet split apart. Geometry was sacred. Astronomy was a form of devotion. To design a letter was to touch the underlying code of creation. The small circles were not merely stars, but divine eyes, watching, witnessing, ready to respond when called by the right pattern. This is why the celestial script feels alive. Even now, centuries later, its shapes seem to hum with an old frequency, the same frequency that once vibrated in the mind of its maker. But there's a shadow here too. If these letters were meant to bring heaven into matter, could they also invite powers not intended? The Renaissance magician knew. A script that calls angels might also be overheard by other forces. Thus secrecy became part of its virtue. Only the learned, only the prepared, were to wield these forms. To write a divine name openly was to expose it. To write it in celestial form was to wrap it in light and geometry, so that only the one who traced it understood its path. This interplay of revelation and concealment is the heartbeat of the alphabet. It is a bridge, but a guarded one, and that makes it different from common writing. Latin letters carry words across the room. Celestial letters carry them across the veil. You realize now why Agrippa placed the alphabet in the final book of his philosophy, the book of angels and the highest magic. It was not for beginners. It was the script of those ready to align themselves with the currents of the spheres, to step into the role of interpreter between heaven and earth. But this was only the beginning. You have seen the shapes and their geometry. Next, you must see how they were used in talismans, seals, and invocations, and how their presence changed the texture of a ritual. You will walk into the ritual chamber itself. Watch the letters traced in the air, and feel the moment when symbol becomes presence. If a single pattern of lines and circles could open a door to the unseen, would you dare to draw it? You enter the ritual chamber, and the air itself seems arranged like a page of script. Candles stand at measured intervals, their flames forming points of light, each one a circle in an invisible letter. You understand now. The entire room is an inscription, and you are standing inside a word. On the altar rests a square of pure parchment. The magician dips the quill into ink dark as the space between stars. With deliberate breath, he traces the first celestial character, a thin line rising at an angle, ending in a single perfect ring. The ink dries instantly, as though the parchment had been waiting for this mark since its making. This is the angel's name, not spoken, not sung, but wrapped in lines and circles, lifted out of the common world and placed into a geometry that angels recognize. In Agrippa's time, such inscriptions were not decoration. They were the very spine of a talisman. A ring, a disc, a strip of vellum, whatever the medium. It became a vessel only when inscribed with a name. In the alphabet of the heavens, the letters did more than identify. They aligned the object with the forces it called. You can almost feel it, the way a name in ordinary script feels flat, while the same name in celestial script hums against your palm, like a chord plucked in the air. It is not the ink. It is the pattern. The pattern is the offering, the invitation, the open door. Imagine a protective amulet in the 16th century. A merchant wears it under his doublet, its surface engraved with 4 celestial characters, each one a consonant of a divine acronym used in Jewish mysticism to shield the bearer from harm. He does not flaunt it. No one on the street can read it, but each time his hand brushes against it, he feels as though the stars themselves are keeping pace with his steps. This was the quiet power of the celestial alphabet, to be both visible and unreadable, present yet concealed, a message to the invisible realm written in the language of light. And the script was not confined to parchment and metal. In the urgic rites, the high magic of invoking divine powers, The magician would sometimes trace the letters into the air itself. A circle drawn with the point of a wand, a diagonal slash connecting two unseen points, a ring that closed with a whisper, all invisible to the mortal eye, yet luminous to the angel addressed. You see it happen, an invocation of Raphael, the letters of his name drawn one by one, hanging in the air like constellations summoned from the night. The magician stands inside these floating signs, and the air thickens with a presence that is not entirely his own. But such precision demanded preparation. The Renaissance mage did not approach these alphabets casually. He fasted, prayed, purified his space. He calculated planetary hours, chose the metal, the color, the incense. Only then did he write. For to write in celestial script without the proper state of mind was to mimic the form without carrying the force. The letters, in this understanding, were not magic by themselves. They were vessels. The vessel must be clean, the intent sharp, the moment aligned with the currents above. Then, and only then, would the pattern come alive. This interplay of form, timing, and intention is why the celestial alphabet endured beyond Agrippa's century. It was adaptable, a cipher for secrecy, a sigil system for talismans, a set of ritual gestures for invocation. Later orders, like the Golden Dawn, folded it into their own complex systems, placing it alongside Hebrew, Enochian, and astrological glyphs as one more key to the unseen. And so the letters traveled through time, carved on brass pentacles, painted on temple walls, inked into the margins of private notebooks. Everywhere they went, they carried the same quiet assertion that the world could still be spoken to in the script of the sky. But this was only the beginning. The letters themselves had a history, a lineage among other mystical alphabets, some older, some parallel, all sharing the belief that symbols could bridge the mortal and the divine. To understand the celestial script fully, you must see it in that wider constellation of secret writings. And so, you step from the ritual chamber into the library of hidden alphabets, where every shelf holds another key. If you could hide one truth in a script only angels could read, what truth would you choose? You walk into the library, and the air smells of parchment and iron gall ink. Shelves rise like pillars, each one lined with books that do not speak in plain words. Instead, every spine is marked in shapes and signs, some curved like rivers, some jagged like lightning, some star-tipped like the celestial forms you now know. This is the gallery of hidden alphabets. The celestial script is not alone. It belongs to a family, each member a key forged for a different lock. First, you find transitus fluvi, crossing of the river. Its letters bend and hook like flowing water, still written right to left, still echoing Hebrew in their order. They feel softer, as though meant to carry messages across a current, bridging one shore to another. Some magicians favored it for charms of passage and safe return, writing the names of travelers in its looping shapes before sending them into the unknown. Next, Malachim, the writing of the angels. Its lines and circles remind you of celestial forms, but rearranged, as if the letters had been scattered in the wind and landed in new positions. It is sharper, more austere, a script that looks less like a constellation and more like the blueprint of a temple. In some grimoires, Malachim stands in for celestial entirely, used interchangeably in talismans and seals. You realize Agrippa's genius was not in making just one script, but in presenting three at once, a triad of ciphers that all spoke to the same invisible order. For the Renaissance mind, more alphabets meant more pathways, multiple dialects of the divine. Yet these were not his only influences. Older, stranger scripts line the next shelf. The Theban alphabet, with its flowing, looped forms, was whispered to have been preserved from medieval magicians, passed down in the sworn book of Honorius. Though unrelated in structure to celestial, it served the same purpose, to hide sacred words from the unready. In modern witchcraft, Theban thrives as the witch's alphabet, often mistaken by the untrained eye for an angelic hand. Beyond these, you see fragments of even older traditions. Jewish mystical texts speak of the alphabet of the angels and alphabet of the magi, rarely illustrated, more often hinted at in the margins of the Sefer Raziel. There are ancient magical characters from Greco-Egyptian papyri, not alphabets in the usual sense, but individual glyphs meant to capture forces in a single sign. You sense the lineage. Across centuries, magicians have drawn new skins over old words, each design a lens for channeling intention. Here, in this library, you begin to understand the celestial alphabet's place in a larger constellation. It was not a lone miracle. It was a Renaissance answer to an older universal impulse, to create a form of writing that speaks to heaven first and only second to human eyes. Agrippa, standing on the shoulders of Kabbalists, Hermetic philosophers, and cipher masters like Trithemius, wove Hebrew's sacred weight into geometry's clean precision and tied it all to the stars above. Others before him had done the same in their own languages and symbols, but his version, star-tipped and spare, was one the Western magical tradition would carry forward for centuries. Yet, even among its kin, the celestial script carried a unique claim. Its very name promised that it belonged to the sky. To write in it was to write in the architecture of the cosmos, to leave marks that angels could follow like trails of light. But this raises a question that tugs at the edge of your thoughts. If this script is a bridge upward, can it also serve as a mirror, reflecting divine order down into the mortal realm? If so, then perhaps it is not only a language, but a pattern for shaping reality itself. This is where the script story turns forward in time. It will leave Agrippa's study, pass through the secrecy of grimoires, and find its way into the hands of new orders. Victorian magicians, Freemasons, Thelemites, each one adapting it, blending it with their own symbols, and sending it further into the future. You are about to follow it into that journey, to watch it pass from parchment to print, from the guarded circles of ritual to the wide currents of modern occultism. If you could invent an alphabet that spoke directly to the stars, what shapes would you choose? You follow the letters out of the dim libraries of the past and into a brighter, noisy age. The printing press has scattered knowledge like seeds, and among them, the thin lines and star-tipped circles of the celestial alphabet. It is no longer confined to the hand-copied grimoires of Renaissance magi. It appears in printed talisman manuals of the 18th century, engraved on brass and copper plates. Its forms ringed around planetary seals like halos of silent light. In the lodges of Freemasons, geometric ciphers echo its structure, their lines and dots rearranged, but recognizably born of the same idea: to bind a letter to a shape, and a shape to a secret. In the 19th century, the great occult revival gathers its currents. The Golden Dawn instructs its initiates in Hebrew, Enochian, and the magical alphabets of Agrippa. You imagine the initiate at a wooden desk, copying each celestial character into a leather-bound notebook, learning not only its sound, but its planet, its element, its angel. On temple walls, the letters glow in gold paint alongside zodiac signs and pentagrams, each one a fragment of a larger cosmic sentence. Aleister Crowley passes through these halls, and though his own work focuses on other languages of angels, he keeps the celestial script in his arsenal, a reminder that the alphabet of Agrippa still speaks to those who walk the high roads of ritual magic. The 20th century carries it further still. Occult publishers reprint the Magus and the 3 books of occult philosophy, making the celestial alphabet available to anyone who cares to turn the page. Artists etch it into tarot decks. Silversmiths carve it into rings and pendants. In back rooms of esoteric bookshops, you might find a poster, 22 characters in neat rows, their circles catching the light, captioned Scriptura Coelestis. Some who buy it will study it. Others will simply hang it as a charm, letting the shapes work their quiet influence from the wall. And now, in the age of glass screens and electric light, the alphabet still breathes. It drifts across digital forums where magicians trade sigils, appears in the corner of a live stream altar, even slips into video games and novels as the language of angels. Most who see it will not know its history, but a few will feel the pull, the same pull you have felt. For this script is more than its shapes. It is an inheritance, a thread of intention stretching from Agrippa's study through centuries of ritual to your own hands. To learn it is to step into that current. To write with it is to join the conversation that magicians, mystics, and dreamers have been having with the stars for more than 500 years. Yet the celestial alphabet has always carried a dual nature. To scholars, it is a human creation, a clever Renaissance cipher draped in the robes of antiquity. To practitioners, it is a living bridge, a way to shape thought in the geometry of heaven, to cloak a name in the garments of constellations. You have walked both sides of that truth now. You know the history and the craft, the form and the function. You know how a simple line ending in a circle can be more than ornament. It can be a call, a key, a vow. Ao, gas, tempu, kobe, pamchi, diris. So the question remains, what will you do with it? Will you copy it into a notebook as a relic of occult history, or carve it into the tools of your own practice? Will you let it remain an echo of the Renaissance, or will you write your own words into its starry script? adding your voice to the silent chorus that has been rising for centuries. If the angels placed a blank page before you and asked you to write one thing in their own alphabet, what truth, what name, what prayer would you dare to inscribe?